Resuming debate, the honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the previous speaker said off the top, and I'll repeat what she said, elections are central to our democracy, and through them the people of Canada give us here in the House of Commons the huge privilege and responsibility of representing them. If people feel that elections are not fair, if they feel that elections are biased in any way, it erodes the confidence they have in us and in all the work that we do here. So this bill is about political financing. It arose in response to the Cash for Access fundraisers that Liberal cabinet ministers were organizing. And there's a lot of things wrong about these events. First and foremost, I think, is the conflict of interest. Lawyers paying to lobby the Minister of Justice. Bankers paying to lobby the Minister of Finance. And they're paying the Liberal Party. It would be bad enough if you had to pay a government user fee to gain access to cabinet ministers to recoup the cost of their salaries or whatever. But this money went directly to the Liberal Party. And finally, the secrecy. Events were usually private. The public didn't even know about them, so couldn't attend them if they'd wanted to or if they were wealthy enough. And we didn't find out who donated until the year-end reports. And this bill only fixes the last problem, and I think it entirely misses the point on the most serious aspect of Cash for Access. I think if you asked a reasonable person on the street about what they find troubling about the Cash for Access problem, they wouldn't single out the lack of transparency. They wouldn't say, gosh, if I only knew the names of the people involved, I'd feel okay. Or, boy, if I'd only been invited, it would be okay. No, I think they would say the problem was the conflict of interest, asking people to pay big bucks to the Liberal Party if they want access to cabinet ministers. Now, I know that lobbying happens every day on Parliament Hill without money changing hands. I was talking to one of my Liberal colleagues the other day, and he was saying how busy he was in his office with lobbyists, and that's great. He's working hard. That's his job. But Cash for Access is a different kind of kettle of fish, and this bill should have put an end to it. Instead, it actually legitimizes Cash for Access with a dollop of transparency. Now, because of that added transparency, that extra step, the NDP will reluctantly support this bill, but we'll keep reminding the Liberals that the conflict of interest aspects of these events has to be dealt with. The Liberals say they're fighting inequality in our society, but Cash for Access entrenches inequality. It gives more power to the powerful. No wonder many Canadians are cynical about politics and politicians. And if anything increases cynicism in politics, it's when politicians break promises. Now, people are smart. They know that governing is difficult, and sometimes you can't fulfill every little promise you made during the election. But when you break a big, juicy promise, one promise that got you elected, people feel completely betrayed. Last weekend, a constituent emailed me about an issue, so I called her back and we talked about that issue, and at the end of the conversation, she said how happy she was to hear directly from her MP. She said that she had felt that she'd lost confidence in politicians after the last election. She said that during her campaign, she and her husband had engaged their children in discussing the party platforms and issues and figuring out which of those issues were most important to them. And in the end, they actually let their children decide who they were going to vote for. In the end, they decided that electoral reform was one of the most important issues. They didn't want Canada to elect another parliament where a party with 38 or 39% of the vote held 100% of the power. They were deeply disappointed in the Conservative government for taking us down a path that two-thirds of the country disagreed with. So they were excited to see that 3 of the other parties made electoral reform a central plank in their party platforms. They were happy to hear those leaders, including the present Prime Minister, repeat time and time again that this would be the last election held under first past the post. And that's what I saw at all candidates' forums during the election. The Liberal candidate stood beside me to repeat that mantra that this would be the last election run under first past the post. The government would ask Canadians and ask the experts what the new best system would be, and they would implement that. And the audience would stand up and cheer. Those people aren't so happy now. The woman I talked to was devastated. She told me her children were so disappointed with the Liberals for going back on this promise that they might not vote in the next election when they're old enough. This betrayal is going to breed cynicism across Canada. And all of us here knock on doors throughout our ridings, and some people are happy to see us and some people don't agree with our party. But the big disappointment to me was when I began door knocking was the number of people who told me they don't vote. And they told me, don't even try to tell me to vote or tell me why I should vote. That changed in the last campaign. Most people were engaged in issues and were, excuse me, and were going to vote. I think they were energized by the feeling of change sweeping across the country, the chance they had to make a difference. 3 of the parties had pledged to change their electoral system, Mr. Speaker, so that every vote would count. Some people want to change our electrical system as well, but strategic voting would be a thing of the past. You could vote for your favorite candidate and your favorite party and know that you would make a difference in the final result. Unfortunately, they elected the only party that would break that promise. It started out well. The minister asked MPs to hold town halls to talk to Canadians about electoral reform, find out what they thought. And NDP MPs answered that call. We held multiple town halls, asked people their opinions at the end of the meetings. We wrote down the numbers on what the kind of systems they wanted. We sent out questionnaires to every household in our ridings and tallied those numbers. 80% of those responses were in favour of proportional representation. Liberal MPs held town halls as well, but few, if any, actually asked people what system they favoured. NDP MPs started going to some of those meetings to find out if our results had been biased. So they asked the crowds at the Liberal town halls for a show of hands on what system they would like. But no, about 80% of those people wanted proportional representation as well. The Electoral Reform Committee met through the summer, asking experts from across the country and around the world what the best system for Canada might be. Almost 90% of those experts said that proportional representation would be the best system. The Prime Minister says that he broke his promise because he couldn't find a strong demand for Canadians for change and thought that changing it would be bad for Canada. He's ignoring those experts. He didn't ask Canadians. Instead, the government sent out a laughable survey that asked ridiculously biased questions around the margins of electoral reform. There was no question asking, do you want change? Do you want seats in the House of Commons to reflect the proportion of the vote? But despite the silly questions, the survey did find that 70% of respondents wanted a government where several parties agree before a decision is made. And almost 2/3 agreed that it's better for several parties to govern together, even if it might take longer for government to get things done, as the question said. You know, Canadians want political parties to work together in Parliament. And despite the way that last question was asked, things will actually get done faster if that happens. Just look at the snail's pace in this government's action, brought on by their uncooperative attitude with the opposition that has brought the system to periodic halts. Canadians want a fair electoral system that produces results that accurately reflects the faces of this country. Canadians want more women representing them in this House. And all this could be achieved with a new electoral system that uses some form of proportional representation. We must work constantly to maintain a healthy democracy in Canada, and we must fight everything that breeds cynicism about our work here in this place. Many Canadians feel they have no voice, that their votes don't count, and they don't have an equal opportunity to voice their concerns to the government. Real electoral change would do that. Finding out sooner which lawyer paid $1,500 to the Liberal Party to get access to the Minister of Justice doesn't help much. Finding out in advance that there's an event on Bay Street where you can meet the Minister of Finance, admission fee only $1,500, that doesn't help. We need strong laws banning unethical conflicts of interest, and we need true electoral reform to keep our democracy strong. Thank you.